Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lindsay Jennings, and I'm the Director of Development for the Institute for Humane Studies. I'm delighted to welcome you today to our crucial conversation. Please note that we are recording this webinar to share with those who are unable to attend the live event today. I would like to thank all of our supporters who are joining us. Because of you, a freer society is possible. Your investment in IHS is critical to ensuring the ideas rooted in classical liberal tradition, such as the belief in the inherent dignity of every individual, freedom of thought and expression, and limited government, reach and have influence beyond the walls of the university. At the Institute for Humane Studies, we believe classical liberal principles are essential to ensuring human flourishing. Toward this end, IHS is investing in talented students, scholars, and other intellectuals advancing the principles and practices of freedom. Central to these practices is the belief that diverse viewpoints and the exchange of ideas are crucial to building and maintaining a good society. We believe that fresh thinking and civil discourse are needed now more than ever. They matter in universities, in public policy, online, and to everyone on this call today. That is why we started Crucial Conversations, to bring you the best and brightest minds in their fields, applying their knowledge and reach to solve today's most pressing problems. And if you enjoy this crucial conversation today as much as I think that you will, be sure to register for the next one on Wednesday, July 10th at noon with former ACLU president and free speech advocate Nadine Strawson. Today, our guest is Tony Carilli, who will be speaking with IHS's very own president and CEO, Emily Chamley-Wright, about how he inspires undergraduate students with ideas from the classical liberal tradition and how they are hungry for these ideas. I'm thrilled to introduce you to Emily and Tony.
Thanks, Lindsay, and good afternoon to everyone who's joining us today. We're so grateful to have you all here. As Lindsay said, my name is Emily Chamley-Wright, and I'm the president of the Institute for Humane Studies, or IHS for short. Now, in just a few days, America is going to be celebrating its 248th birthday. And this is, I can't think of a better time to consider today's vital question, which is how do we reach the next generation with the ideas that underlie a successful American experiment, the classical liberal ideas of political, economic, and intellectual freedom. And to help me do that today, I am so thrilled, absolutely thrilled to introduce Tony Carilli, who's the professor of economics and business at Hampden-Sydney College. Now, I know that many of you are concerned about the state of American higher education today, about, we hear on a daily basis about another story about the lack of intellectual openness or another story about the lack of civility in the face of disagreement on campus. And I'm just as concerned as you are. But it's also true that in these reports, it's very easy to miss stories about teachers like Tony, who's been inspiring his undergraduate students for more than 30 years with the ideas that underlie freedom, prosperity, and widespread human flourishing. Tony is among thousands of masterful teachers in the IHS community who go above and beyond the day-to-day work of teaching to help ensure that students have the opportunity to dive deeply into these ideas. Now, if you're already a supporter of IHS, thank you, because it's because of you then that we're able to offer what we call our educational entrepreneurship grants to support those professors who go to do this sort of above and beyond work that Tony and I are going to be talking about today. And by that, I mean things beyond the classroom, that opportunity to geek out with readings groups, discussion colloquia, lecture series, research and writing fellowships, student participation at a professional academic conference, and more. Now, I can tell you as someone who spent most of her career in higher education as a professor and then as a provost, that these are the transformational learning opportunities that definitively change lives. So let's dive in as Tony and I chat. I hope that you will use the Q&A button to register your questions. You can find it right at the bottom of your Zoom window. And we'll take up as many of those at the end of our conversation that we can fit in with our time together today. So Tony, first of all, thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to have you here.
You're welcome. I'm excited.
So let me start with, we're going to talk in a minute about the awesome stuff that you're doing with your students, but can I take you back in time first and start with your journey? Tell us a little bit about how you were introduced to these ideas. What was the path for you diving deeper into those ideas and becoming a professor?
Yeah, that's a great question. It goes back to when I was a little kid. I never really realized it till I kind of after graduate school, I look back on how did I get here? And I remember when I was a kid, my father always had, like, he told me a couple of things. He said, remember, nobody owes you anything and never throw the first punch. I was like, wow, that when I start to go back and think about where the idea of classical liberalism comes from, that's kind of a really cool two-person, blue collar, regular Joe kind of guy description of what classical liberalism is. And then I remembered one time even after that, and I'll be a little more specific in a minute, but I remember he worked for Honeywell as a field service engineer, which I used to tease him was a fancy name for computer mechanic. But he worked on computers. We carry these things around in our pockets that when I was a kid, I used to go out to the computers with them that were the size of my house and the size of rooms where drives were as big as fireplaces. I remember him telling me a story once when they were competing with IBM, and the government made a rule that said all printers had to have the same interface. And this was we were camping in Vermont, and he's telling this story. I don't remember why or how. And he said, that's going to ruin innovation. So if everybody has to do the same thing, there's no reason for anybody to try to be different. And these are all the kind of things that I had in my background as a kid. And we were never very political in that regard, but those are the kind of things that came back around to me. Then when I was an undergraduate, somehow I got invited to an honors seminar in economics, and I found Milton Friedman because I was writing about stuff that was weird to me, that sounded interesting. The economics of drugs, the economics of sports, the economics of pornography, whatever I could find to tweak somebody, I wanted to do. And I found Milton Friedman's columns and from Newsweek. And then after that, when I went to graduate school, I spent a lot of time riding the bus and train in Boston. And I started reading Free to Choose and Capitalism and Freedom. And then one day, by happenstance, I was in the big TA office at Northeastern University and saw a laissez-faire catalog, ordered Mises Liberalism, read that book, and it was pretty much over for me at that point. That was always in the background of everything I did. I worked through my dissertation on taxes, and my whole first chapter was about why taxes are burdens and bad and all that. I don't know how I got that past them, but they let that go. This is back in the days when you didn't write you actually wrote a book, right? We didn't write 3 articles. We had to develop a book-long theme. So I kind of, over time, it was always in the background. And then through graduate school, I kind of push on the ideas because I have a little bit of a contrarian personality, as Emily knows. If you tell me if you tell me one thing, I'm going to say something different. And being a classical liberal in the world, and especially in academia, it's easy to be a contrarian in that sense and push ideas, because for me, you use the great idea, the great American experiment. And the idea, coming back from Mill, I don't know what I believe until I hear you tell me what you believe. And those ideas that I get to talk to you and you get to talk to me, and we get to disagree and develop our ideas. You can't be autodidactic and do your own ideas. You have to say them out loud. You have to test them. It is an experiment. I have a hypothesis. This idea is better than that idea. Let me put it out there, and you tell me whether the emperor has no clothes.
What I love so much about that description of your journey is that what comes sort of, leaping off the page here is just, it's not only that you're engaging in these conversations so that you can learn, that the discovery process is there. What's coming across too is the genuine joy of those conversations, the genuine joy of disagreeing with each other. That's not something to be avoided. It's something to relish, and it's the source of our most intense and rewarding relationships and friendships, right?
Yeah, yes, I I always like to tell my students there's a difference between argument and debate. Debate is about winning, and I don't care about debate. I'm not interested in debate. I'm interested in argument. If you want to make argument, I'll sit with you all day and argue about anything, because that's when I always have always said, I don't remember who said it. I wish I could give him credit for it, is I've never learned anything from somebody with whom I agreed. And so I seek out people I disagree with so that I can learn from them and I can learn about what I think I know. Because when you have to articulate your ideas and you have to bounce them off of someone who doesn't agree with you, you learn whether your ideas hold merit. And sometimes I believe things that people would come back to me and tell me, no, that's just silly. And I would try to find a way why maybe it was or wasn't silly, and have changed my mind about a lot of things because of bouncing back off of ideas with other people. And where I am right now at Hampden-Sydney, I am blessed to be in a place where that is the norm. I know we don't hear about that in higher education. You mentioned it earlier, but the norm is for us to eat lunch together in the cafeteria with students and have philosophers and biologists and historians and political scientists all sitting around the table. And it's almost never lunchtime conversation. It's about some ideas or somebody saying something just to tweak somebody else to get him to defend his argument and his ideas. And it's a wonderful thing to be able to do. Every day that I learn something is a good day. I want to learn something new every single day, and I don't care what it's about. I'm curious. People who aren't curious frustrate me. I love people who are curious. I want to be around curious people, and I hope my curiosity never goes away. When it does, there's no reason, we're done.
And the other thing that's going to come through is that curiosity is infectious. And I think we're all getting just the tiniest little sense, a little sampling of what it's like to be one of your students. Because that sense of like sparking that intellectual imagination and curiosity amongst your students, it's contagious, I'm sure.
Yeah, I always tell my students, I won't say the word. I'll be polite here and not say it, but I always tell them, you always have the right to raise your hand and call BS. Now, if you call BS on something I say, you better have an argument for why it's BS. And I also tell them, look, I don't get paid any more or any less if you agree with me. I didn't come out here to be your friend, and you're not, we're not, this isn't a friendship relationship. This is a learning environment. I learn from you, you learn from me. If we're not going to argue, if we're not going to disagree, we're not going to learn from each other. So I don't want you just to say back what I said, like hear what I said and then repeat it back to me. In fact, I tell them, if you just agreeing with me is not enough. If you agree with me, you better be able to defend why you agree with me. And disagreement is my lifeblood. Disagreement it drives my wife nuts, but because I just like disagreement. I like to say no and then push forward, because that's how conversations go. That's what a conversation is I disagree. Let's talk about something. Or I don't know something. Tell me something that you do.
So you're doing amazing work in the classroom, but about 15, 18 years ago, you started doing work beyond the classroom, beyond the traditional classroom, that were special opportunities to help students dive in deeply to the ideas. Can you describe how those efforts have evolved and what kinds of things you're doing with your students today?
Sure. I can't remember exactly the year. It was 2006, 2007. Chris Coyne we were lucky enough to have Chris Coyne, who's vice president IHS or some title like that.
He's on our board.
He's on your board. And Chris Coyne, who's a professor at George Mason. And I have to give a shout out to George Mason real quick too here, because one of the beauties about George Mason is in most graduate programs, a college like Hampden-Sydney is a booby prize. I don't want my students to go to teaching colleges, because I want my students, if I'm an R1 professor, I want them to do research because it makes me look better. And I get that because my students' success is my success. George Mason has never viewed our job as a booby prize. In fact, we have been lucky to have students have visiting professorships. We have a current professor from George Mason right now, Trey Carson, who is fantastic. And they have always been supportive enough. And Emily, I don't think I told you this story before, but Henrik Rasmussen, who is the son of the Danish prime minister wanted to go to George Mason and study economics, Austrian economics. And Pete Betke, God bless him, said, no, go to Hampden-Sydney, study there, and then come here to graduate school. So one of the beauties of that connection was that we actually had Henrik's father on campus. I ate dinner with him in a little room. I don't remember there being a lot of Secret Service there. They were probably hanging out. We didn't know. But he and I debated his father over the Euro at the beginning of the Euro and told him, you're not Misesian at all. And it was a fun debate. So that was kind of the beginning of that. And Chris helped us found the Center for Study of Political Economy. And what we did in the Center for Study of Political Economy and have done over the last 15, 18 years is we have 3 or 4 basic programs. One is a speaker series, because that's a way to get the ideas to lots of people. And we've been doing a speaker series and have had a lot of speakers and have had Chris brought the first one in. It was Walter Williams. That's a heck of a way to kick it off. So it's been a high bar.
I would not have wanted to be, as someone who was, Walter was my professor in grad school, I would not would have wanted to have followed his act.
No, he and the students absolutely loved him, as you might imagine. I mean, a charismatic, booming, great presence of ideas, and it was. And the students argued with him while he was on campus. They argued with him in the lecture hall. It was great. And so that was our first part. And then we also had a senior fellows part, which is we paid students to write papers. So we would give them a pretty good stipend to write a paper on broadly classical liberal ideas. And we've had not just economics students, but philosophers, political scientists, historians. We have a biologist that's working on some stuff with us right now. All across the campus have come and we paid them not only to write papers, but one of the criteria is they had to present their paper at a professional conference. And what was really cool is we were all part of this little association called the Virginia Association of Economics, which is almost 50 years old now, founded in Lynchburg, Virginia by a bunch of liberal arts professors, basically. And our students used to go to these conferences and present in the adult sessions. So they weren't like shunted off to the side. So they actually had to present their work to economists. Mm-hmm. And it was so successful that the VAE, the Virginia Association, is now basically moved over to more and more and more student presentations as its mission. That was the second thing we did. Recently, we also did reading groups. And our reading groups, we try to recruit away from the 4 members of the center, the CSPE, Center for Study of Political Economy. We try to get away from them to draw other people in. Again, we've had reading groups run by philosophers, biologists, historians, physicists, psychologists, all across. Classicists. We had a classicist do one on, I think it was on Aristotle. And this is a long time ago, and we would run those sort of reading groups. And then more recently, we've added a junior fellow program in which they get first crack at whenever we have a speaker on campus. And I learned this from my undergraduate professor, is a speaker on campus is not a time for the faculty to engage with the speaker. They have plenty of time for that. It's for the students to engage. So we limit the number of faculty that can be. We have a dinner before. And the dinner is usually for about 14 people because we can put that around one big long table. The faculty have to sit on the ends. The guest sits in the middle and the students are around them. And our junior fellows kind of get first crack at that opportunity, trying to get them into some other things. And those are the things we've kind of done. I know yesterday our group met with, I think while I was out, and they met with people from Sweetbriar, and we're trying to help Sweetbriar give them some plans about how to get off on that. And we've had relationships with Roanoke College, Christopher Newport University, Virginia Wesleyan. We've pushed using what little bit of knowledge and funds we've had, we used to kind of broaden our scope. We've run reading groups with other colleges. We've had seminars. We did a free speech seminar with Christopher Newport, and we've done some stuff with Roanoke College. So we we do a lot of different things, all out of the love for the ideas and all out of the just the little bit, as you said, it's all extracurricular, and we couldn't imagine not doing it.
Yeah, and what I appreciate especially about your speaker series is that emphasis on it's building an intellectual community. It's not just helicoptering in, a famous person where they stay on campus for 2 hours, then go away. They're deeply diving into the ideas with students, lots of opportunities to connect over meals and coffee where, the students also have read the work of these visiting scholars as well. And so can you give me an example? You talked a bit about the research projects that some of the students are doing. What's the value? Why do this kind of work? Because they're writing term papers all the time in their classes. What is special about this? And maybe, if you could give us an example or two of someone who surprised you. Maybe that was the surprise was the depth of the work, or it was a novel argument. Just kind of give us a little taste, a flavor of what happens in that process.
I'll give you two very recent examples because there are more four in my mind that come to my mind immediately. One is a student named Jacob Smith, who's now at Middle Tennessee State studying for a PhD, and he wasn't really interested in academics at all, but he wanted to work on a paper on we were thinking about papers on bourbon, and he goes, "Oh, that's a really cool idea." So he started looking at the Bottled in Bond Act, and he made his own data set. He went to archives, created his own data set, did some work, and the ideas started to change. I hooked him up with a historian on campus who taught him how to do archival research. We sent him off to the National Archives and the Filson Society in Kentucky, and he came back with a completely changed paper, did a presentation on campus, which in my 30 years is the best presentation I've ever seen a student do. He went to the Southerns and presented it in a Southern Economic Association meeting in the Society for Development of Austrian Economics session. And people just looked at him and said, "You're an undergraduate?" And Vincent Geloso jumped up and yelled out as soon as he presented the paper, "Publish that bleepy bleep right now." And then he started talking with faculty members and other graduate students. He wasn't a grad, and he just completely gave over. And now he's into the ideas. He's at graduate school. He's doing really well. It's been fantastic. So he's working on his PhD in economics. Another quick example is a kid named Max Petrikovsky. Max was a really quiet kid that kind of would say things to me off the cuff or send me emails and about ideas. It's like, oh man, this kid is deep. And one of the weird things we did is one of my other side gigs is I'm an umpire. I umpire Division I baseball, and I've umpired some professional baseball. And he liked baseball, so we developed this theory based on whether or not we looked at this question, and we're still looking at it, is whether there's racial bias in umpires' ejections. So this kid read Becker one summer and completely got the idea of economics of discrimination. We've developed a taxonomy for ejections and types of ejections where we'd expect to see things. He presented this at a baseball, a SABR metrics, which is statistical something in baseball. And it was, people were Google over his presentation where he did the whole presentation out. He's done it a couple times on campus, and people have really loved it. And those are the kind of things we sponsor. He's going on to take the ideas, and he's going on to study at the Mason School at William and Mary. He's studying data analytics based on all of this kind of stuff. So we push people not in just to academia, but they're out there in the world bringing these ideas out in the world, and they're infectious. And just to give you one idea, because I know I go on too long, I was coming off an airplane in Richmond one day, and I was near the front, and as we boarded, I heard running footsteps coming from behind me in the airport, and guy just yelling, "Dr. Carilli, Dr. Carilli, Dr. Carilli." And I wish I could remember the student's name at the time. I don't remember right now. I just remember the story. And he said, how you been? I graduated 4 years ago, blah, 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 blah. And he looked at me and said, I just want you to know that if you graduate from Hampden-Sydney in economics, you're going to be a libertarian. And I said, what? He goes, you guys, just everything is about the beauty of markets, the way markets work, the way they reward dignity, the way they understand human flourishing. And I will never forget that. And I was like, I get goosebumps right now when I hear the story. Like I got goosebumps. And it's just, I never set out to make him a classical liberal. We just talked about the ideas, and they understand the importance of the classical liberal tradition in human flourishing and why it's so important in human flourishing. And that's just, for me, that's all the success I need. And we just want to do more of it.
And I'm going to remind our guests to feel free to hit the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen to enter your question. What I love about that, those couple of stories, Tony, is that what comes through is your deep love of the whole enterprise, your love of the ideas, the love of where the ideas can take you, whether it's to understanding the history of baseball or contemporary challenges within baseball, or the political economy of bourbon, which is a whole other story, as I'm sure your background is tantalizing to some of the folks in the audience, and maybe we can get to that in the Q&A. But one of the things that we're excited about with the educational entrepreneurship grants, is that it taps into that love. It taps into that internal self-motivation that masterful teachers like you are bringing to the game, and marrying it with some resources that allow you to up that game and to bring it in, and to have those transformational experiences for more students. Can you give us a sense? You've done so much of this for so long on essentially a shoestring budget. What does having more resources help you do?
Having more resources just gives us, it's like anything else, the ability to increase the inputs is going to increase the outputs, and the ability to not worry about whether or not I can only run, because we have waiting lists to run reading groups and for our students. There are faculty who ask me in the fall, can we do this in the spring? Or if I can't do it in the spring, can we do it in the next fall? So we're limited in the number of reading groups, and the reading groups are limited in size for obvious reasons. The faculty who run them it's not a lecture. The students are required, by the way, the really cool thing is the students are basically required to lead the discussion. They are required, and we have terms. If they don't follow through their terms, they are asked to leave the reading group. That you didn't read this week, that's one strike. If you don't read next time, will give us back the book, right? And just allowing for us, as you said earlier, one of the cool things about the speaker series is anytime we bring in a speaker who has a book, we buy the book. And then I sell it to the students for like $2, just so they have some skin in the game. I sell it for $2 or $3. And sometimes they'll go, I don't have the money right now. I go, okay, but you owe me. And then I forget that they owe me, and we go there. So it will allow us, and it's really cool to watch the students read the books, meet the professors, talk with them, meet the people who wrote them, and then get the book signed and talk to them about what they did. It's just fantastic. It allowed more for that. It allowed us more opportunity to get students to conferences. One of the hardest things we do, we had a student early on, by the way, win one of the Appy Awards. Alex Cartwright, who's at, I think he's still in Michigan, but Alex won an award for his paper on prostitution and the lemons problem. And he got a little grief for it on campus, which was fun, which had created a little dust up on the campus over it, which led to a really good debate on campus, which was really, really kind of cool. So it'll allow us more, like, how do we get students to go to the conferences to present those things? How do we, because it takes money for a student to go to a conference, even if it's a local, if the Virginia Association of Economists meeting is in Lexington, we got to get them there. We got to house them. We got to put them overnight. We got to feed them, all those sorts of things. All of those kind of things will make it easier. It'll help us bring scholars in on more than just, say, a day. Because if we're bringing a scholar in for a day, we're not, if we can offer him more reward, we might say, hey, can you come in on Thursday, stay? And we do have a lot. Thankfully, we have so many friends in this network that have come and they want to stay the next day. And recently we had the guys from Words and Numbers on, and they were absolutely amazed at the questions our students asked and how polite they were and how civil they were to each other, even when they disagreed. And I think the same thing happened when Alex Narasta came in and talked about immigration, which is a hot button topic, even for our students. And they were just amazed at how well crafted their questions were and how polite and civil they were in the disagreement. And it's more resources allow us to do more of that. When you think about Hampden-Sydney, we're a small private liberal arts college, by the way, one of the only 2 all-men's colleges left in the country. And we are a colonial college. We are the 9th oldest college in the country. And we touch, from the CSPE members, given the size of our major and the number of students and the core curriculum we have at Hampden-Sydney, we probably touch 750 of the 1,000 students that are on campus every single year. And so we have broad reach, and the idea of markets and teaching about markets and the importance of markets to all those that allow us to expand all of those sorts of things. It's always about the ideas. The more stuff we can do, the more ideas we can get out, the more interaction we can get with students, the better it is outside of academia too, because we send students all over the place to do all sorts of things, and they do really good things, and the ROI and the statistics for us are incredible. We have an all-male college that graduates a couple hundred, 250 guys a year, and we've generated almost 24 PhDs in the last 25 years. And my first PhD student, Justin Isaacs, is one of my colleagues right now and has been a longtime colleague. And he's part of the Center for Study of Political Economy. And it's, beside just putting out the PhDs, we're sending people into other things where they're bringing those ideas and they're thinking about those ideas and they're infecting other people through entrepreneurship. The number of entrepreneurs we have, if you've ever heard of Busky Sider, that's one of our guys from the CSPE. The ideas are just everywhere, not just in academia. So our return on that little bit of investment is massive. And it's great when they come back and they talk to us. Alumni weekend is one of my favorite weekends of the year.
That's awesome. I want to invite Lindsay back in, who can help us with some of the questions that you all have raised.
Yes, thanks, Emily. We do have a couple of questions for you all. The first one is, we hear a lot about things going wrong in higher ed right now, and many think students are not getting an education. But what is your view? What gives you hope? What excites you about working in higher ed still?
I can speak for, I feel that I pay a lot of attention to this. I'm a First Amendment absolutist. So I think without speech, the reason people want to control your words and your vocabulary is because they want to control your ideas. If they tell me there's a word I can't say, that means there's a word I can't think. And if you're trying to control what I say, you're trying to control what I think. Period. End of story. And there's a lot of that goes on in higher ed, but think about where it's going on. You're not hearing about it from the small private liberal arts colleges where a lot of education is done and a lot of future leaders are. These are not, mid-tier state universities in the liberal arts colleges, and you're not even hearing these sort of things. You're hearing this from people where it's cheap for them to have this idea. If you're going to Harvard or one of the little Ivies, and you already were born with a silver spoon in your mouth, you hit a triple, right? And were born on third base, and now you don't understand the cost of getting to third base. So it's costless for them to misbehave. So from the economics perspective, so when you come to a place like Hampden-Sydney, these small private liberal arts colleges and the professors that we interact with, we are in cheek by jowl with these guys day in, day out. I live on campus. I walk to my office every day. I see students everywhere. I have students to my house for dinner. All of these sorts of things we are entrenched with the students and they with us, and we are bumping with each other all the time on ideas. And I am so optimistic in this margin. I wish more people were, because where the real thing is going on is in the traditional liberal arts colleges. We still have a core. You still have to take 54 hours of courses in things like math, English, classics. We do Western culture here. You have to take 2 Western culture classes and then a global cultures class. You have to take math. You have to take science. You have to take English. You have to write. We have a rhetoric requirement. We're not unusual for a small liberal arts college. Small liberal arts colleges are there because the people who are there are dedicated to their craft. I'm not a scholar, right? I'm not a scholar like at an R1. I love ideas. I take other people's ideas and I filter them to other students. I try to organize them in a big pile. And a lot of people at liberal arts colleges are like that. A lot of us are systematizers. I had a student who went to George Mason, got in trouble once for a take on, not in trouble, he got teased once for a take on Hayek. He was talking about Hayek and said, Hayek in 1945 said this, and he goes, that's not in 45, Hayek. And he goes, well, Carilli said it was. And I go, well, it may not have been in 45, but it certainly was in 82 and 37. And it's all the same stuff. All those papers are one big paper. It doesn't matter what year it was said. It's all together. And those are the kind of things that people at small liberal arts colleges are doing. We're bringing the ideas of the people who are on the edge of trying to bring these out, and then we're trying to distill them down to our students. And I think the future of higher education is in small liberal arts colleges. And I think people agree. We have another boom in our enrollment this year. We have one of our biggest enrollments in the last 15 years coming up this year, freshmen coming in. So I think there's people that realize that that's where it is right now.
Great. Thank you, Tony. We have another question. In the early part of your career as a graduate student and junior faculty, what was the environment like for classical liberal thought? How has the environment improved since?
When I was in graduate school, I did all this kind of stuff, as I said, on the side, and did some stuff. And I remember I asked a graduate professor once, he was a micro teacher, and I won't say his name because it's not important. I said, what about property rights? He's like, property rights don't matter. I said, how in the hell do you have exchange without property rights? How can we exchange things if we don't have property rights? And then how does micro exist if micro is about price theory, which we can debate at a different time. If micro is price theory and prices are the result of exchange, they're the trace of exchange. You don't get a price until an exchange is over. Otherwise, it's just a bid and an offer. So whatever you go to Walmart in and it says $2, that's not a price. That's an offer, right? And then I can make a bid, and if we agree, now we have a price. How do you get a price without exchange? And he told me graduate students have a zero weight in the social welfare function. I was like, oh boy, I'm not going to be like that when I start teaching. And I was fortunate here at Hampden-Sydney to be given a lot of leeway, but I was really, when I came into my department, I was the only real classical liberal in my department. The other people were standard. We actually had a kind of a standard socialist. I used to love to debate that guy. He was one of my favorite people in the world. Straight up Keynesian macro stuff. And I started dilling around, creating a course, getting students. And the beauty of the small liberal arts colleges is if you're minding your own business, putting your nose down, putting your head down and doing your work, and the students like what you're doing. And I'm not saying like from the idea that, oh, I get good reviews, that they come back and they learn and they come in and they're excited about it. And I have been the foil for more faculty on this campus than you can imagine. Students will come back to me and said, Professor so-and-so said this. Professor so-and-so said this. I was like, great. And then I meet those professors, I go, thank you. Thank you, because you're doing what I want you to do, right? Is all of this goes together. The liberal arts is how does all of this stuff fit together? And so the environment has just gotten better and better and better here. And now we're to the point where we have, I'll bet you we have a dozen people on this campus who, and even outside of economics, who would openly claim to be classically liberal and believe in these ideas, which is a lot for a small campus. And we actually have some conservatives on this campus too, some old school conservatives. So we're not overrun. And I think that's the case in a lot of little liberal arts colleges.
And I'm going to weigh in here too, Lindsay, if that's okay, is that, you know, Tony's described a local environment where the environment for classical liberal ideas and thinkers is become more hospitable. You know, big picture, if we go back to the very start of the Institute for Humane Studies in 1961, it was founded by Baldy Harper, who was doing literally a head count of scholars and professors who were still advancing the ideas within the classical liberal tradition. And it was, you know, like a couple of dozen. If you look at the original documents founding the organization, he names them, right? And so what I look at now is our network of almost 7,000 intellectuals who are excited by these ideas. Among them are 5,000, more than that, more than 5,000 professors who are doing this kind of work. And this is what's exciting to me. And one of the things that excites me most is the sense of they're classical liberal in their training and what they teach. And also they do what Tony just said. They also invite the disagreement. They invite colleagueship and intellectual friendship with the professors and the students who don't come from that tradition and are, but still excited to engage around the topics that we can have those deep conversations. So I look at the growth of what IHS has done over many, many decades as another sign of the importance of building an intellectual community.
Great, thank you. I believe we only have time for one more question today. So we have many IHS supporters on this call. What's one thing you wish they knew about the difference that they're making?
That it is a difference, that it's tangible, that you know, when you said you go back to Baldy Harper and you go back to read all of those things that are reading and collected and put together, without the resources that create, you know, bringing back books that were written, you know, hundreds of years ago, or even, you know, more modern things, and making that stuff available, making this intellectual environment available, letting us know we're not by ourselves, right? When you say there's 5,000 other professors, you're like, oh, I'm not all by myself. There are other people out there doing these things. And when you support that, it's not just support me or support one other person, is now we know that, oh man, somebody else thinks these ideas are important too. And there's strength in numbers, so to speak. And whenever there's somebody else around, you don't feel like you're standing in the middle of the forest screaming and nobody can hear you. And creating that environment. I mean, I know when you try to go to an IHS event at a conference, you can't move because everybody's packed in there like sardines, because there's just so many people, and they're the biggest events at the conferences. And that intellectual tradition and the conversations are great. We disagree with each other, which is fantastic. And it's the conversations are fantastic, and the resources that we get and IHS makes available makes us feel like there's hope, and makes us understand that we're not alone, and we're not fighting, we're not tilting at windmills, we're not Don Quixote, right? We are actually, there's an army of Don Quixotes, and that makes us all feel really good about that. And I can't tell you how much, I couldn't possibly put in words and express how much the support for us matters, and especially at a place like this, and especially at the small liberal arts colleges where a lot of professors that love the ideas want to be.
So I want to thank you, Tony, for joining us today. I also want to thank you for the incredible work that you and your colleagues at Hampden-Sydney are doing. And I also want to thank all of you for joining us today. Now, again, given the state of higher ed, you might be feeling like you want to be part of the solution, but you don't quite know how. My hope is that in meeting Tony today, you now have a really concrete example of how your support is making a difference. Now, this year, through the Educational Entrepreneurship Grants, we're supporting 50 professors just like Tony. But there's so much more we could be doing because there's so many more professors who are eager to do this kind of work, which is why we're focused on raising $2 million to expand this program to hundreds of masterful teachers having a kind of transformational impact like you've just heard Tony describe. And if you're inspired by what you've heard today, we want to help us grow, we hope that you will consider contributing to the fund that supports the Educational Entrepreneurship Grants. And together we can ensure that the future generations are inspired by the ideas that ensure the success of the American experiment. Thank you all for joining us today and for everything you do for IHS and for advancing a free and open society. Thanks so much, and we'll see you soon.